Foodweb perspectives. I talk about lower trophic levels. We spent a lot of years with a very supportive LOC to help them understand the importance of understanding what's going on at the base of the Foodweb. But really, there's less about integrating the whole food web here and really just putting that foundation of the changes that are happening, nutrients, plankton, and other things that are really supporting the prey and predator fish populations. And so the talk with all my co-authors listed up here, it's a compilation of a lot of people's efforts. Many more people working behind the scenes than just those listed here, but again, multiple agencies on both sides of the border supporting the information going into the lower trophic level talk. Rationale for again, incorporating lower trophic levels and having the opportunity to speak here before the LOC. I really think there's value in incorporating that lower trophic level information because it's engaging the broader public. Right now, throughout the Great Lakes, we're dealing with issues around water quality and nutrient, and we don't want to find ourselves in sort of that antagonistic environment, pitting fisheries against water quality. I really think by incorporating it really brings both communities together, and that really lets fisheries managers, by understanding things that are responding quickly, like nutrients and invertebrates, they respond quickly to environmental change, and so that's really giving us a bit of a barometer on the potential for change that may be happening with fisheries and supporting stronger management decisions. So to move through some of the indices, what you're going to see a little different this year than the past, I'm going to show you the whole composite long-term time series. So yesterday in the common session, we heard Tom Stewart talk about an initiative he's taking on to start to compile lower trophic level indices across the basin. So this is our effort for Lake Ontario, a bunch of different indices, generally showing the same trend, in this case phosphorus, sort of the fuel that's driving the system. The Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement target shown there, and so generally all the indices have moved down below that, but really I think what we want to start doing is recognizing there's a long-term history and there's a recent history, and so I'm showing you here the most recent 15 or 16 years for phosphorus, and so the trends in the sense of decline are not as dramatic, though there still are statistically significant declines going on in phosphorus. They're just not as profound as they appear in the other graph. But what is very evident here is phosphorus in Lake Ontario is well below the target that was set by the IJC. This is a graphic that was put together after the CSMI year in 2013 by Alice Dove, sort of showing for the spring what the distribution of phosphorus is across the surface of Lake Ontario. This is a theme I want to drive home again this year, as I do every year, that when we put a dot on a graph and we say this is the representation for 2016, this is really what the surface looks like. Where you pick your dot is really going to influence. We've got hyper-eutrophic conditions on the South Shore in the Niagara River Blue, and we have ultra-oligotrophic conditions occurring elsewhere in the basin. So where you're looking in Lake Ontario really matters, both in space and in time. Chlorophyll, so this is really the base of the food web. This is the algae that's out there. Again, the composite long-term time series. And the more recent 15 years, and so again, a lot of variation going on, but again, there are statistically significant trends. There still are declines going on in chlorophyll out there, but certainly the changes aren't nearly as profound as when we go all the way back into the 1970s. So here, if I can have Haley help me out with my little animation. Again, this is data from 2013, put together by Barry Lesh. And what it's showing you again, emphasizing this spatial variability now with time as well. The amount of chlorophyll resolved through satellite imagery varies considerably in space and time as we go through the year. And so once again, when we start to make decisions about what the status of things are, there is a tremendous amount of change that's going on out there. Water clarity, another important index, and so SECI, again, the composite long-term time series, again, significant increase going on from the 70s to the present day. But when we concentrate in the most recent 15 years, again, the trends are not as profound, but again, there are still statistically significant trends occurring in this data. They are not really dramatic changes, but there are still increases going on in the clarity of the water in Lake Ontario. That increase in water clarity, this is some data that Brian Weidel and others have put together back in 2013. The depth of the chlorophyll maximum. So now as the water is clearer, more of the production is occurring deeper in the water column at what we call this chlorophyll maxima. And this is showing evidence of that. Again, the change through time. This is some data recently put together by Annie Schofield and others at Cornell, again based on the intensive monitoring year of 2013, and this is looking at the seasonal progression of chlorophyll moving by month. What we have are all the stations where the data was collected up here, and then these vertical lines that you can faintly see here correspond basically to these different transects going across the lake. And so now you're looking through the months from the west end of the lake to the east end of the lake, what the distribution of chlorophyll is, and again, in the midsummer, we're seeing this chlorophyll maxima largely concentrated in the eastern end of the lake, and then in August, that concentration occurring in the west end of the lake. But the importance that where this production is, where the chlorophyll is happening, is not at the surface, but it's deeper in the water column with considerable spatial and seasonal variation. This is some data that was put together by colleagues at DFO, and so again, I've just talked about the importance of the deep chlorophyll layer, and what their data showing for both stations in the east and the west end of the lake is that in 2015 and 2016, the importance of that deep chlorophyll layer may be lessening to some degree. So we had a very prominent in 2014, the deep chlorophyll layer, very obvious, this being temperature, so just below the thermocline you see this spike in chlorophyll, but in 2015 and 2016, it's not as prominent as it was in previous years. Just something to have on our radar to look ahead to. Again, is this another indication of some degree of change that's going on out there? Again, data, this for Station 81, a long-term indexing site in eastern Lake Ontario. And this is actually estimated primary production, so the amount of carbon that's basically produced per unit area, per unit volume per hour. And so again, it's not a continuous time series. There is data back in the 70s, a long block of data going on from the mid-80s to 90s, and then this recent resurrection of the program between DFO and MMR. And so again, what you're seeing is there's significantly less production out there now than there was in the past. Not a significant trend going on in the recent period, but certainly much less than there had been historically. So last year I showed you this graph. This is based on Station 81 data, and this was some work that Heather and Moy Manowar had worked up. Again, as I say, Station 81, and really the important factor last year was saying in 2013, the intensive monitoring year, there was significantly less biomass out there, but when we actually looked at the production in 2013, there was more going on, and the hypothesis that was put forth was maybe the smallest fraction of the picoplankton was really driving the production, turning over very quickly, so when there wasn't a lot of it, it was keeping the carbon moving through the system, and maybe that was providing some sense of stability to the food web. This is data that Moe and Heather and others have worked up, and so we have 3 sets of data here, Station 81 in these first set of bars, and then 2 stations at the west end of the lake, and the time series running from 2013 to the present day. And so while this was sort of what we were seeing comparing to a longer time trend, when we look from 2013 forward, and the bars are now reversed, so the smallest size fractions on the bottom, but as we move through time, what we're seeing is that we've seen a loss in the spring production going on and more of that production moving to the fall. And so again, things continue to change. We heard Mark Tuckman mention this yesterday with some of the data elsewhere, how we've seen a switch where production used to occur in the spring, now we're seeing higher production occurring in the fall. So again, how the system is operating is continuing to change through time. Long-term zooplankton time series. Again, we've talked about this one every year, and so really as we go way back in time for the Epilimnion, this is the surface waters of the lake, certainly a significant trend going on, a big change in the community, and a real decline in this more recent time period. But when we look at the whole water column, the time series doesn't go back as far, but really a change in the community, but not the big decline that we saw in the Epilimnion. And that's again, considering with the deep chlorophyll layer, changes in the environment that the plankton are moving deeper, we're seeing more production in our deep water hypolimatic community, less production in the shallow water, sort of the cladocerans and warm water community. Again, recent data from DFO with the zooplankton, again looking at West Basin stations versus a mid-lake station. And again, just looking at more recent time periods, 2013 to 16, just the changes. So 2013, that intensive monitoring year that we've done, we're queued up again for 2018 to do it again, but what we're seeing in between, and so we've seen a loss in the cyclopoids. The peak was in 2013, it's come down. We've seen changes, So we've got the different seasons here. 2016, as I'll show you in a moment, there was a resurgence of Bifidtrephes, the invasive predatory cladoceran out there. They came back in a big way, and so in the fall, when they're most abundant, they may be influencing the relative proportion of daphnids and other sort of large body cladocerans. So we're seeing shifts in the community related to changes in the composition of the zooplankton. And so again, for the Bifidtrephes trend, again after a virtual absence for 3 years, in the west end of Lake Ontario, it always used to be dominated by Cercopagus, the smaller cousin of Bifidtrephes. In 2016, it all became Bifidtrephes. So in the west end of the lake, Bifidtrephes showed up where they really hadn't been a big player. And in the east end of the lake, the two species have coexisted. But again, Bifidtrephes were back in a big way. 2016, alewife numbers down. Alewife prey heavily on Bifidtrephes. So is this an example of predation release, allowing Bifidtrephes to become more abundant? The Bifidtrephes then preyed on the zooplankton and led to a change in the plankton community, which is going to affect algal dynamics. So these are the food web effects that are going on out there in the system. Mysis, an important deep water prey fish for a lot of our species that are out there, and really no trend in the recent time series. Healthy numbers of mysids. Benthos, again, in 2018, there'll be another comprehensive survey, so this data is only up to 2013, but just to remind everybody that, yeah, things have changed and changed in a big way. Lake Ontario, diapry are all but gone, and dreissenid mussels continue to increase, and as Ashley Elgin had shared the data after 2013, really it's the spatial distribution of those quaggas as well, becoming more abundant further offshore, so continuing to expand into deeper habitats. So, putting this graph together a couple of years ago, the calm seas for Andy and Steve, generally speaking, no, there are no strong trends in lower trophic levels since the late 90s, with the exception of benthos. But those trends, when we take them away from longer time series, they are still statistical changes. Things are still moving. But the large spatial and seasonal gradients, very important to keep in mind when we look at the system like the Lake Ontario or any of these Great Lakes. These comprehensive, coordinated lower trophic level programs Bo was talking about, Mark was talking about, Tom's talking about. We need these things. We can't just go out to one point in the lake and grab a sample and say we understand the dynamics. They are changing, and they are changing very, very rapidly. I just want to take the last couple of moments to sort of reflect on something. This is a graphic that Rick Barbiero put together a few years ago and shared with me. I touched base with them just to sort of update my time series at the bottom. But I think this is really reflective in thinking about Lake Ontario. So if we go back 30 years, the upper time series, that's the relative position on a trophic gradient of the 4 Great Lakes. So Lake Ontario was rich with phosphorus. It was not good, but it had lots of phosphorus. Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, things got better. All the lakes moved down. Lake Ontario is moving into sort of the position of Lake Michigan. But then what happened in the most recent decade is that the other lakes continued to slide, and Lake Ontario didn't move. So Lake Ontario is different. We heard that yesterday in Owen's talk. Lake Ontario is different, but we've got this built-in comfort level now. We've got a lot more phosphorus than the other lakes, which is why things are probably moving along pretty well. But in sort of a yin-yang of Lake Ontario, 2 big announcements came out last year. And so the one was that the government's agreed to make substantial cuts to phosphorus loading in Lake Erie. And at the same point, Steve and Andy made an announcement through stakeholder engagement to make cuts in stocking of predators. The predator response was a response to declines in alewife. It wasn't necessarily a food web response. But after listening to me for 15 minutes now, there's a link between lower trophic levels and fish. And at the end of the day, we need to think about this. Because 57% of the phosphorus coming into Lake Ontario comes from Lake Erie. So if you take 40% of that away, that's equivalent to a 25% cut in the phosphorus load. And so if I look at my little graphic down here, and I have my Lake Ontario, it's going to move. And if it moves 25%, it's still well above the other lakes. But that's a lot less phosphorus out there. So the IJC has put together the Lake Ontario Nutrient Targets Task Team, heck of a name for a group, but they're looking into making recommendations for what good targets are in Lake Ontario. These are their preliminary recommendations. They need to come up with a nutrient mass balance model. Bo mentioned this yesterday. What we see in Lake Ontario, what they're seeing in Lake Ontario, there's an unexplained sink. The amount of phosphorus coming into Lake Ontario does not equate with the observed patterns in phosphorus. So there's a huge misunderstanding, something we need to address out there. So it's great that we're working on that. 3D hydrodynamic model, that just says they realize the lake is mixing and dynamic, all that spatial stuff I was showing you. It's important they need to understand how the whole lake functions if they're going to understand how nutrients are feeding into it. They've recognized we need to develop a Foodweb model, and that Foodweb model has to go all the way up to prey fish and predators. We can't stop with it being a nutrient model and think we can solve a nutrient water quality problem by ignoring what's going on with the rest of biota. So again, another excellent recommendation, and Cladophora is back in a big way in Lake Ontario, and so they want to have a binational strategy to monitor Cladophora. So just my final thought for you here, a food web is a complex web of interacting species, and so something that changes somewhere in the system is going to have an effect elsewhere in the system. And so Lake Ontario is healthy, it's robust, we're going to hear lots more presentations about how good the system is out there, but it is changing. We're not allowed to say climate change, so I didn't say it. We've got nutrient change going on. With invasive species, it's not as much of a problem as it used to be, but Dreissenids are continuing to spread, Bithotrephes are back in a big way, etc. The system changes, and so we've got to think about the whole system when we think about managing Lake Ontario. So with that, way over time as usual, but thanks to Foodweb.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Hope you had a good lunch or a meeting at lunch. You had to do that. Sorry for your luck. Anyways, I'm going to give you a brief update on sea leopard control in Lake Ontario. As you've heard a couple of times already this morning, the fish that are usually negatively affected by sea leopard seem to feel pretty good. So I could say we're done. However, you got to stick it out. So our presentations are fairly regimented in their style. I'm going to go through sea leopard control targets, kind of remind you where we left off last year, and then talk about our field season and our plans for the next field season. This picture of a guy named Troy pulling dams in a little salmon, so part of our fun job is making water flow when it doesn't flow too good. If you remember last year or back to last year, if you've got the handout near you, if you don't, there's somewhere in the lobby. We were saying that the adult abundance index was around 11.4. That's what came out of the 2006 revision. And we were just under that at about 10,300 adult sea lamprey out there with a marking rate of 1.8. That's what we told you last year. And then we went into the field and did some work. I'm going to start off with treatment. There's one of my techs. Very proud of her very first feeder site she set up. And within half an hour of doing that, that pump there went on fire. So I should have taken an after picture because it wasn't nearly as nice. Anyways, as you can see in this picture, we hit about 10 rivers around Lake Ontario. As usual, some are in New York, some are in Ontario. A couple of the biggies were the Credit, Bronte, and we thought we did a really good job last year on that. For barriers or alternative control, as you can see, we went through and did a lot of routine work, updated some databases. Some of the interesting parts of this is the structure of Bowmanville of the Vance Dam and the Streetsville Dam on the Credit River. Both have a bit of an escapement issue, so we still are looking at those two dams. Every year there's some proposals to remove culverts or alter them in both countries. There's a list of some of the ones we've looked at in New York and also in Ontario. And of all those, we didn't have any issues, I'll say. Environmental assessment is quite important for my work also. Basically, these guys go through and find out where the lampreys are in rivers, larval lamprey, kind of how far up they go, and feed a database to tell us how streams rank out or give us their expert advice about where to go. So last year they looked at around 58 different streams around Lake Ontario. The abundance surveys are a little different, where they actually estimate abundance. There were about 6 of those. They did 23 surveys to look for new populations, and they, as far as I know, based on that document, none were found. You can see way off in the distance in this picture, that's Fort Niagara. That's doing some granular bear work in the Niagara River. And every now and then they go in after our treatments, all 10 of them, and do some post-treatment evaluations. And unfortunately in South Sandy, we did have some residual larvae, which I'll talk about again soon. As I said before, they looked at the effectiveness of barriers by going upstream of barriers. So ones like that one in Bowmanville and the other in Credit, they found out they weren't too effective in Credit. That's why we treated Credit last year, and that's why we have to go basically, I'm going to say at least double the distance for Bowmanville this year. It's almost a brand new treatment. We did some additional work in the Seneca area because we had found lampreys in there and had to do some treatments that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service delivered last year, or the year before in 2015, but they didn't find any lampreys. We did 2 new tributaries to the Credit, so lampreys are always finding new places to go or going further upstream than before. And we treated those 2 rivers. The funny thing with one of them, it started right inside the Maple Leaf chicken processing plant. And I got to do that afternoon shift. The smell was right on. Post-treatment surveys for the Black River Lentic area, which was treated in 2015, showed no residual larvae. For me, that's pretty good. I thought sometimes our GB work, that's granular bear treatment, only has about 70% success rate, and that was a pretty good finding for us. So these are the sites where we have barriers that people operate, and we take information from to assess the adult population of sea lampreys. And remember that 1.8 I talked about? This year, recent data from Ted and et al. Tell me it's 1.4, so it's even lower. I'll show you a graph in a sec. That was based on information we get from various partners around the lake who monitor that marking rate. 431 is around 17 inches, in case you wondered. In those traps I talked about that were around Lake Ontario, they caught around 4,000 lampreys. And you roll that all up, the adult index of abundance is around 7,200. What was it last year? Around 10. That's a further decline. Excellent news for your salmon and trout at least. Here's the graph. I didn't put that new point on it yet. So the endpoint's 2015. At 1.8, the next one is 1.4. I just got that information 2 days ago. This graph shows the adult index of abundance. As you can see, it's declining. It's been down for the last 4 years straight below the target, and it's helped probably a lot with your lake trout recovery that you're seeing. So we're going to change gears and move into next year's work. As you can see, we have another 8 rivers to do. South Sandy's on the list again because of those residuals. And we'll probably do almost all this work before mid-June. It'll be all done. Bowmanville Creek, as I said, is going to be basically a brand new treatment. I'm going to go, say, from Highway 2, if you know the area, all the way up to the 6th concession now. So it's 4 more concessions. Quite a large watershed now. So we're going to take a look at some barriers. That Streetsville Dam shows right there. it's kind of leaky with respect to lampreys. You're going to try to figure out why. And if you can't really see that inset too well, but that star right at the top, it's not where as far as it can go. Not right now, but they can get to about there. That's where we keep from now. That dam there is a real old one. So there's potential for a lot of watershed to open up if we don't fix the Speedsville one. Is that a prize already? What was that? I did eat one. As I said, the larval work is super important for us because it helps us plan and weight how we deliver our program so that we get the most bang for our buck. So next year they're looking at 70 streams. We're ranked 4th in the U.S. They're going to do some detection work on another 20. And that's all the bulletin for that. Added a new part to this, and so did Sean this year. That's good. So our environmental assessment people take a look at rivers and do all kinds of interesting work about fish communities that are above barriers or there during and after treatment. For me, one of the interesting ones they're going to do is they're going to come down and look at Bowmanville and take a look at it because we've never been above that barrier and talked about that Vance one. Here's a picture of Luke Glover letting a carp loose from his electrofishing. In these rivers, they have quite the diversity of species. So, that thing's an old barrier in New York State. It's not functional, but just up from is where our feeder site is, but there is a functional one. So I'm all done. I'd like to thank all the jurisdictions that help us out around the plate. We can do our work without the landowners. I'd like to thank the LOC and their staff because they help us out a lot throughout the whole year with more than just getting their chemicals.